Good morning, everybody. Morning. Morning. Good morning. Okay, let's start. Let's start, please, with the latest on COVID and Matthew.
Good morning. So, obviously, 250,000 deaths, far surpassing what seemed like outlandish predictions early on, and certainly no signs of slowing as we head toward Thanksgiving. Yesterday marked the most deaths reported in a day in almost 7 months, over 1,800. It was also the second highest ever day for cases, over 170,000, and about 80,000 Americans are now in the hospital, the most ever. Of course, the biggest setback yet in the big city in New York. Schools closed until further notice, further restrictions likely coming, noting, of course, that indoor dining is still underway. As schools are closing, lots of growing restrictions everywhere. And, of course, no White House leadership, an obstructed transition here. Biden saying this could all put the U.S. behind weeks or months. HHS staffers, we learned, told not to communicate with the Biden team. Azar saying HHS won't help Biden until the GSA says it can. Fauci hasn't talked to the Biden team, but in an op-ed says he wants to. And a big story once again, starting to see images of empty store shelves and purchase restrictions popping up all over the country and online just as people stock up for the holiday. And I'll just note, stepping back, 250,000 deaths and 11.5 million cases later, how little has changed. America still divided despite clear facts, piecemeal restrictions instead of a unified response, politics interfering, and still an outcome that is absolutely in our hands to change. Jawar telling CNN last night, as you've heard so many times before, we know how to fix this. And Dr. Ali Khan on New Day, our previous bad choices are not our destiny. With that, I'm going to focus in a little on vaccines, the finish line in focus, a very clear timeline emerging to follow now. Even more good vaccine news overnight. AstraZeneca reporting phase 2 results. The vaccine safe and generating an immune response in older volunteers. But here is the short-term timeline to watch. Tomorrow, we expect Pfizer to submit to the FDA. Monday, the CDC meets on how to prioritize who gets shots. And then December 8th begins the meeting that should end with a decision on an emergency authorization. Operation Warp Speed officials saying shipments will begin within 24 hours of that decision, and they will be fair and equitable, and they will go well because Warp Speed has been running distribution rehearsals. Jawar saying last night that at least 50 million doses will be distributed by the end of the year, and obviously an ambitious plan considering all we've heard from states about distribution challenges, but he calls it an incredibly well-oiled plan. And we've got an Elizabeth Cohen package which focuses in on a closer look at what's involved in this FDA review process underway right now. Looking around the country at the regions and the restrictions, talked of ramped up rules from coast to coast. In California, LA County announcing a curfew for non-essential businesses starting tomorrow. Same might happen statewide. Stephanie Elam's up in LA. Wisconsin extending a mask mandate and the public health emergency through January. Minnesota, the governor says the state is at a breaking point, announced a 4-week rollback, no gatherings between people from more than one household, restrictions on restaurants going further. Adrian brought us up in Chicago on the Midwest epicenter. Florida crossing 900,000 cases, the third hardest hit state. Natasha Chen up in Orlando. And then in addition to New York City schools, we have schools going back to fully remote, statewide in Kentucky, and district-wide in Denver. Diana Goldriga on the education front. Sarah Seidner is in Michigan with a piece that just debuted on this ER doctor who became a patient in his very own hospital. He was on a breathing tube at one point. Says even with that, he was accused online of being a hoax. He's begging his fellow Michiganders to take this seriously. And then Omar Jimenez is in West Texas with a piece tonight for 360, visiting 2 strained smaller hospitals. Elsewhere from health, it's a rare day, but there is a CDC briefing today with questions and answers, 11:30 a.m. telebriefing. Obviously a lot on the table to ask about the response, where it stands now, vaccine distribution. Among the likely questions, this New York Times report that the CDC quietly pulled that controversial Trump administration return to school document posted over the summer that we talked so much about. And we hope to find out more about what states are telling the CDC about vaccine distribution needs. We have Jacqueline Howard available through the day. Sanjay Gupta coming up tonight for Prime. Couple of other key storylines on COVID. Dan Simon filing for the lead on this wrongful death lawsuit against the Tyson plant in Iowa. Says the company was not only negligent and misleading as workers got sick and died, but that managers even talked about wagers on how many employees would get sick. We should continue to highlight the states without mask mandates, the few of them that are left. Arizona's governor resisting that again yesterday, saying 90% of the state is under local mandates. And, of course, South Dakota that we've talked about and a few others that were up on Digital West. And just staying on the story of Thanksgiving, obviously we've had a bad run this year of holiday gatherings and the aftermath. Lots of warnings with these long testing lines we're seeing around the country. Don't think you can go get one negative test and be good to go for a Thanksgiving gathering. The wrap pieces today on COVID are Nick Watt for 3, 5, 7, and 9, and Erica Hill for 4, 6, 8, and 10. And that's it.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. And we have a couple big bookings on COVID tonight. Bill Gates will be on AC 360 at 8 p.m., and Anthony Fauci will be on Cuomo tonight at 9 p.m. Are there any thoughts on COVID?
Yeah, Jeff, good morning. It's Ben. I try not to do too much looking back, at sort of where we've been, because there's nothing we can do to change the past. But I do think at this 250,000 death mark, it is worth hitting pause just to see what we've done to ourselves. The first case in the U.S. was January 20th. That is 10 months tomorrow. Yesterday, as I mentioned, and as Matthew mentioned, we hit 250,000 deaths here. This is not a natural disaster. This is not a flood or an act of God. This is a virus that we very much know how to control, and we are not. Study after study, model after model shows just how many lives we could have saved with masks, distancing, lockdowns, things that are relatively easy to do. Even the economy, we know from studies that have been done, would have turned out better, not to mention, the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of lives saved. I just think this says a lot about who we are, and this is a good point to stop and take a look in the mirror. In that same vein, in New York, as Matthew mentioned, schools are now closed, but indoor dining and bars are still open. Experts have said that we need to choose. Look what we chose. And then looking ahead to Thanksgiving, what I can almost guarantee, or what I will guarantee, will be complete and utter selfishness on the fact, on account of a lot of people. COVID fatigue is real, but it just takes one exposure to get sick. So even if, you've been good all along, and just say, I'm going to do this one dinner, that could mean you get coronavirus. And I will just draw attention to a really, really great piece that Sanjay and Andrea Kane wrote last month that anyone can pull back up, that shows the dose of coronavirus that you're exposed to could determine how sick you get. Obviously, Thanksgiving, where families spend a lot of time indoors, close together for long periods of time, that could mean you're exposed to a very high dose. Thanksgiving could really be, the match that really sets off the next phase of this, even worse than where we are now.
Thank you for that perspective, Ben. It's very helpful. Any other thoughts? Okay, before we move to Washington, I just want to make 2 points that I think people have we've been covering very well, but I just want to emphasize them, and I think we need to continue to do so. As John Berman said this morning on New Day, Trump is not a wartime president, he's a tea-time president. He's completely disappeared in the face of what Ben just outlined, and I think, we've done a very good job of pointing that out, but we need to continue to do so. 12 of the last 16 days with nothing on his public schedule. He has disappeared at a time when the country needs leadership more than ever, and we need to point that out. And the fact that they're not allowing the incoming administration to lead by not handing over the keys is also dereliction of duty. The other major storyline that I want to continue to emphasize is that there are huge long-term implications for the country about what Donald Trump and the Republicans are doing. We know that there's about 70% of Republicans believe to some degree that the election was stolen from Donald Trump, and what that means as a matter of going forward, regardless of the fact that Donald Trump is going to leave the White House on January 20th, is going to be really problematic for this country and leave people deeply suspicious of democracy, the democratic process, hostile towards it, and make it much harder for the Joe Biden administration to succeed. It is really outrageous, and I think that we need to focus on that. We are doing a really good job on the micro, but the macro ramifications are huge. Washington?
Okay, so on the first point, 62 days to the inauguration, and as you said, entering day 12 without seeing him, there are some indications we're getting that may change today, but it is still very tentative. And Collinson captures it well, also with his headline, "While Trump solves America's Get Sick and Die." The continuing no coordination on COVID, Fauci saying he hasn't spoken to the Biden team, Azar saying no cooperation until GSA makes a determination. And then obviously in addition to the bookings, you mentioned Ron Claims on Sit Run today, so, I expect we'll hear more on that. In terms of all these voting, this voting mess, so Trump this morning is continuing to use the voice that he has through his Twitter feed to continue to stoke those 70% of Republicans who don't think who think that the election was stolen. This morning he's going after Georgia. There's almost 0 ballots were rejected in Georgia. Again, just totally, not accurate. And this continues as there are Hail Marys going on all around the country. In Georgia, just to tick through them, in Georgia, the audit recount we will get at noon. Trump has until Tuesday to request a recount, and there's a 3 p.m. emergency hearing to stop the certification. There is 0 indication from everything we have heard along the way that the vote totals are going to change anything but in minor ways, so all of this, again, useless. After this back and forth last night, the 2 Republicans in Wayne County now want to take their votes to certify back again, saying they were under undue pressure. The point being now that the certified vote has already been sent to the Secretary of State, so another thing going absolutely nowhere but just dragging things out and adding to the larger narrative. In Pennsylvania, there was this wild filings last night from Rudy, including asking his team to count some votes. Even Mulvaney calling Rudy a legal force that is meant more for TV and not for the courtroom. The Wisconsin recount, as we know, will go ahead. And then there's a ruling today on Maricopa County with the judge again expressing incredible skepticism ahead of that ruling. I just want to mention the CNN reporting that on the transition in the midst of all of this, that there's outreach from some inside and recently departed administration folks to the Biden people, sort of understanding that this is, this needs to start moving forward. And then the other story is the military, and Ryan Brown is up on the frightening spike in the military COVID cases. They are also, as the country is, seeing huge spikes and set records last week. And that's what I got.
Okay. Politics?
Good morning, Jeff. Yet again, the President-elect Biden, Vice President-elect Harris are going to focus on COVID management, and this time in probably its highest profile way, the transition, working around the transition and waiting by gathering with members of the Executive Committee of the National Governors Association. We're waiting for a full attendance list. That Executive Committee is 9 governors, 5 Republicans, 4 Democrats. But we know there will be a bipartisan showing of governors at this virtual event that Biden is holding today. And obviously, this will be about sort of vaccine distribution and preparedness for that and implementing a strategy around that. But you've heard the President-elect talk often about the need for masks and how he would like, at the federal level, to be able to do what he can about a mask mandate, but would be urging states to do so. I believe all 9 governors on the Executive Committee represent states where there are some mask mandates in place. but this is the first, big time that we're going to see President-elect Biden with some partners in governing that will be in place when he takes over on January 20th with these governors. The Republicans that are expected to attend, like Asa Hutchinson, obviously already has said Joe Biden's going to be president. He's president-elect, and some of the other Republicans like Larry Hogan and Charlie Baker on this executive committee have done so as well. So these aren't necessarily the most ardent Trump allied kind of Republican governors on this committee. We will then see Harris and Biden speak at around 3:30 p.m. After we see them in that event with the governors, and he will possibly take questions today from reporters. So we'll be on the lookout for what happens there. Just want to mention the comments that Biden made to a group of supporters in a virtual gathering about the brick walls he's going to face in the Senate if the Republican maintains the majority there. Again, getting at that very notion of the division, and of course, Biden's entire, rationale for running of healing the soul of the nation and getting back to some kind of normalcy, and his constant pitch that his long service in the Senate and his relationships are going to be able to create sort of a new moment of comity in the government. His own words here sort of belie that fact, as he acknowledges that he may face brick walls if the Republicans maintain control. Bernie Sanders again on our air last night, making probably his most direct case to date on why he believes he should be labor secretary inside a Biden administration. It's just so interesting to continue to see, his last standing rival for the nomination make this public campaign to be in his cabinet and be labor secretary. And then, in terms of the Georgia Senate runoff, Virginia mentioned the audit coming to an end there, and the possibility that once the Secretary of State certifies the vote, which he has to do by tomorrow, the statewide vote total, that is when the window opens for a couple days for Trump to request a formal recount. It'll be really interesting to see the intersection of the presidential contest that Trump doesn't want to let go of with the need of Georgia Republicans to win these two Senate runoffs in January. Look to see how the Trump campaign handles that recount request, because it'll tell us a lot if they think that's going to help sort of with turnout and actually lean into and accomplish some of their political goals with the runoffs or not. I think we're going to see sort of over the next couple of days an intersection of those two things. And Pence is actually going to be there in Georgia tomorrow campaigning. So Kyung-Wha will stay on top of all of that. And I think, just to mention, since we seem to be citing polls now and have faith in them, it seems again, there will be a new Monmouth poll out at 11 o'clock a.m. today, getting at the very point you're making about how deep the divisions are in the country. It is it'll have numbers that just show Republicans and Democrats in totally different universes about whether or not the country is divided, is going to unite in the months ahead or not. And what you can see is it is just two different universes and a completely divided country. It also will have Congress and Trump approval ratings, so that'll come out at 11 a.m. That's it.
Does anybody have any thoughts on politics?
One quick thing.
Go ahead.
Just one thing. They just announced that this Trump and the Trump campaign with Rudy and Jenna Ellis presser at noon today. This was a great case on reporting about Jenna Ellis in 2016 calling Trump an idiot and saying his supporters didn't care about facts or logic.
Right.
Yeah,
Carl.
One other thing, and that is that there is real fear and resistance in part of the national security bureaucracy and the upper levels right now at what Trump is trying or might try to do. Really taking away the keys to the car from them if they have to. They think, many of them, we're in a real national emergency here with something like a mad king. How we get at this story, I don't know, and we saw some of it with the Iran pushback the other day. Listening to what we just heard in this phone call alone, and the final days of the presidency, with the president still in control of government institutions, but the national security officials afraid of something, Republican Party allowing him to do this. We're in the midst of a plague, a cold civil war that he's ignited, and Bannon, Giuliani, and Brian Epstein are whispering in his ears. This is an extreme. You talk about perspective and context. This is an extraordinary environment. I don't even know how you begin to capture it. But this question of the danger from the Mad King with a Twitter account and the keys is a real one.
Well, if only I knew somebody who had written a book about the final days of a president.
Well, that's my point. Do we frame this in terms of the final plague? Do we frame this in terms of the final days? Put a banner up, crawler, and try to tie some of these elements together in this awful context, particularly in terms of the poll that was just talked about this cold civil war that he's throwing the fuel on the fire on.
Well, for those who don't know, obviously Carl was the co-author of The Final Days in 1976, about the final days of the Watergate scandal, and I think obviously has some good reporting here, and I think we should tap into both Carl here and what his reporting is showing, and I think it's a really important way to get at this, because clearly that is a big part of this story. Other thoughts?
The question. Go ahead, I'll wait.
No, please, go ahead.
One question I had was, when we're talking about 70% of Republicans don't believe or believe the election was stolen, is it incorrect or correct to conflate that with the number of people who voted for Trump? Because if we're talking about registered Republicans, that's a vastly different number than the number of people who voted for Trump. I think we can be clear about that. Someone said 55 million people don't believe the election was fair, and I don't know that we should conflate those. And my second point really goes to the Monmouth poll that David talked about, and I think, part of the reason we're divided is because we have an entire multi-billion-dollar business that's built to profit on dividing us by feeding false information and preying on grievance and bigotry, which is the Murdoch business model here, in the UK, and Australia. And I go back to Malcolm Turnbull's comments, and I don't think we're holding them, their shareholders and board directors, as accountable as we should. We're wagging our fingers to Republicans, but these are the ones who are making billions of dollars of money off of it.
I wholeheartedly agree with the fact that I've said for a long time, I think the three biggest reasons that we're divided in this country are gerrymandered congressional districts, social media, and Rupert Murdoch. And I think that I wholeheartedly agree that if we don't fix at least two of those three, we're never going to get past this. So I wholeheartedly agree with that comment. And I think we should do more on the role of conservative media and all of this. I mean, Rudy Giuliani is reportedly being advised through this whole thing by Steve Bannon. I mean, that's what's going on here. Cynthia, I think you wanted to talk.
Yes, I did. I wanted to say that what I'm hearing from a lot of people on my end is just the word sabotage. And what the feeling is that they are sabotaging Joe Biden's future if he does become president, and the country. And so they purport to care so much about America, yet they are sabotaging the future and that of all Americans, the people that they supposedly care about. And I just think that is such a strong word. And it plays right into what Carl was talking about. If you care so much, why are you sabotaging everything and basically, leaving a minefield
for the future. And in addition to that, why are you trying to steal the election? Now you're really trying to steal the election. And so I just think that those things need to be called out straight on. And I agree with putting much more visual banners that say it. So just a thought.
Okay. Other thoughts? Anyone else? Okay, look, I do think, there's a lot of micro stories going on today in terms of Georgia and Trump hiding in the basement now, and whether he's going to come out and talk today. Tons of stories today. But the big picture, I think, that we have to get at are these two big macro storylines that we've been discussing, that David and Carl and Cynthia and everybody's bringing up, which is the final days and the threat to society and the sabotage that is going on, and the long-term ramifications of what this campaign of discrediting the election is doing to the country, to democracy, to our democratic processes, and to the incoming Biden administration. So we just need to make sure we're always taking the big picture context and not just focusing on everything today. Okay, is there anything else in domestic?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Obviously, whatever else we learn about Bobby Brown's son, Bobby Brown Jr., found dead in his LA home, obviously years of tragedy in that family. And then the Post this morning was an exclusive jailhouse interview with Kyle Rittenhouse, the teen behind the Kenosha crowd shootings. Among the many details in the story, he used money from a stimulus check to buy a rifle. An adult friend had to buy it for him because he was too young. That friend is in court for a hearing on weapons charges today. We're going through the Post interview that we will attribute. And that's it.
Okay. Is there anything else in Washington?
No.
Okay. Before I turn to international, I just want to note, so much of our attention, rightly so, is on the election, the transition, and COVID, as it should be. But there are stories that are important that we need to make sure that we're covering, and enterprise reporting that only CNN is doing. And the latest example of that was Nema Al-Bagher's reporting yesterday that out of Nigeria that focused on the demonstrations there and the police reaction, military reaction, where the Nigerian government had repeatedly denied that the military had used live ammunition against the protesters, and Nema's reporting was truly terrific, and the Nigerian government is now threatening to sanction CNN over it, and we completely stand by our reporting, and I just want to highlight that kind of reporting should very much cut through even in these days. International?
Yeah, so just kind of picking up off the back of that, you mentioned what the government said. They gave this press conference where they didn't respond to the substance of her reporting, that they accused us of spreading misinformation and really lashed out. So she's available. It's a really good day two part of the story. She can remind our audience of the substance of her reporting, obviously rebuff what the government's saying. So we're going big on that as a day two story on CNNI. Beyond that, we're obviously very much focused on US politics and COVID, with the US numbers being the headline on COVID there, but there are some good international angles on that story too. Europe, it's another good positive vaccine story with the AstraZeneca vaccine looking like it's positive, showing strong immunity in people over the age of 70. So Minister Bell is handling that and the overall Europe picture. Selena Wang focuses on Asia, Japan seeing more cases, Delhi seeing more cases. We've also got a good piece from Guillermo Galdos in Peru, looking at people who are participating in phase 3 of the Chinese vaccine, which is just interesting to see how that's panning out. But it also gives us an opportunity to look at
the big political story that's come out of there this week. Cynthia mentioned it earlier this week, but 3 presidents in a week after 4 years of political turmoil. So he's available live just to kind of frame his COVID reporting in the kind of broader political situation that they're seeing there. Ivan Watson has some really strong reporting looking at a story out of Australia, where Australia has come out and publicly apologised for the treatment by SAS soldiers of Afghan civilians. Apparently they killed 39 unnamed Afghans, tried to cover up the killings by planting weapons on the victims, and really just has unveiled this kind of toxic culture where junior officers would be forced to kill Afghans as part of a sort of initiation process. So he's live on that. He's got a piece looking at that too. Another strong story. Oren is up on Pompeo's visit to the Israeli settlement on the West Bank. Obviously quite a controversial move from him. Oren's reporting on that. And finally, Julia Chatterley has an exclusive interview with Alan Greenspan, who talks about this COVID economy story as a 100-year event. He's never seen anything like this in his lifetime. And also he talks politics, saying that he broadly welcomes Biden's economic plan. So that's also ready for us today.
Hey, Jeff, if I could add 2 topics to that for international. Out of Central America, Hurricane Iota might be gone, but the destruction is still there. It has not stopped raining since the storm came at the beginning of the week. Again, these people were still recovering from the hurricane from 2 weeks ago. Heavy flooding, a lot of infrastructure destruction. We got Gus Valdez in Honduras that is available. Finally, he's making his way in. Obviously, the conditions has delayed it, but he is available for all platforms and networks for reporting. And an interesting and important story out of Mexico. The U.S. arrested a month ago the head of the former general of the military, Cienfuegos, apparently the most important drug kingpin in the country, allowing for years drugs to come into the U.S. He is detaining the U.S. and yesterday was handed over to Mexico with supposedly just a promise that they will investigate. I've never seen that. There could be a lot of political maneuvering in the background, but for the U.S., with the help of the DOJ, hand over somebody of that magnitude, it raises a lot of questions.
Okay, thank you. Business.
Jeff, good morning. As mentioned, more than 250,000 Americans are dead, 170,000 getting affected every day. Governors and mayors imposing lockdown measures and no federal stimulus in sight as companies struggle to keep employees and millions of small businesses shuttering their doors. Those long-term ramifications, Jeff, you mentioned, include the economic turmoil that we are seeing. And we're seeing evidence of that in today's jobs reports, where 742,000 Americans filed for first-time jobless benefits. In total, 20 million Americans on some type of unemployment benefit. These numbers clearly going in the wrong direction. This is the first increase since October. Meanwhile, we're getting more warnings from economists and think tanks. A prominent think tank late yesterday predicting that 12 million American workers are at risk of losing benefits if Congress does not get its act together. And of course, on top of that, we have Alan Greenspan, as Mira mentioned, saying that he has never seen anything like this, and saying that we have got to get the virus under control. That is how we are going to fix the economy. That sound is available. Christina Oleshi is up and available on all of those threads. And as we talk about the millions of Americans receiving unemployment benefits, we should also mention that millions of Americans facing food insecurity at this very moment. Feeding America, the nation's largest hunger relief organization, saying that upwards of 54 million people across the country could soon face food insecurity. Vanessa Yurkevich is in downtown Brooklyn this morning, where 1,200 hungry families are set to receive food. This clearly a snapshot of the struggles people will face as they head into the holiday season, out of work and no stimulus in sight. She is up and available on that. Meanwhile, pressure on corporate America continues to be felt, especially in the airline industry. Moments ago, we are about to alert that United announcing saying that that there's been a sizable drop in their system bookings and an uptick in cancellations as a result to the COVID-19 cases. United was the first airline to cut back its schedule in March, and it is seen as sort of like the canary in the coal mine with regard to the airline industry. Pete Montine is up and available on that. And of course, the lack of presidential transition not helping stimulus negotiations, as Virginia mentioned, all continues to be at a standstill. America's corporate leaders starting to distance themselves from the White House and calling on the president to start the transition process. Last night, the country's biggest manufacturing lobby, which counts General Motors and Dow, calling on the GSA to sign off on presidential transition. This followed remarks by Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, at the DealBook conference saying yesterday that we need a peaceful transition. We had an election. We have a new president. And, of course, JP Morgan also releasing a research note saying that there is a chance that this whole transition process could descend into chaos. They are saying that there is a remote risk of an American Horror Story and a constitutional mayhem. Christina Alessi is also up and available on those threads. And lastly, the Reliable team has been all over right-wing media in the wake of the surging coronavirus. It has taken a dark and dangerous turn. Of course, Fox's top personalities now railing against public health guidelines filled with segments in which commentators are mocking precautions. Hosts like Lauren Ingram continuing to undermine the science behind mask wearing, and Rush Limbaugh telling his listeners that Thanksgiving is under assault. Oliver and Brian and the media team are up and available on all those threads. And that is where we begin this morning.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have anything they want to raise before we move to digital? Okay, digital.
Morning, Jeff. We had 34 million uniques yesterday. Our top story was actually the profile of Emily Murphy. That's the GSA administrator. More than 2.6 million uniques and 4.5 minutes of engagement. The Collinson was also big yesterday. Trump officials reaching out to the Biden transition team quietly was an overnight story that did big for us. And as Richard mentioned, that JP Morgan research note warning about the nightmare scenario of a U.S. transition not happening in a peaceful way was one of our top stories. Worth noting that the Chris Krebs firing and the Detroit Wayne County canvassing brouhaha were still in our top 5 yesterday, the day before. So audiences are really into those stories. Right now we have Collinson and Mae Reston in our lead story. While Trump solves Americans get sick and die, with more than 16 million uniques on it right now. Our top video overnight, all day yesterday, on all platforms, was Hear from the Lawyer going head-to-head with Rudy Giuliani. That was on mobile web, app, and desktop. So far this morning, on mobile web, the top video is S.E. Cupp chiding GOP governor's missteps on coronavirus. On the app, it's Breonna Keeler, senator sounds like a kid who doesn't want to eat his vegetables. And on desktop, it's angry citizens criticize election officials, again, return to Wayne County. Today, we will stay on top of the macro lines that we talked about. We'll keep chronicling Trump's sabotage. We're watching the Georgia recount news or any Wisconsin recount request news. I think we have the Georgia presser at noon. And we have a piece coming on the economic cost to all Americans of this lack of a transition and the lack of a stimulus plan. Everything from student loans to evictions. We're keeping up on all platforms our misinformation watch to get to some of the stuff we talked about this morning, happening on right-wing media. And then in audio, we have a piece coming today from the Axe Files piece. It was an interview with Mitt Romney. And Romney is actually most worried not about the delayed transition, but about Trump's actions during the lame duck period, what the president is doing and might do. Finally, in coronavirus land, we have that Tyson's piece has been relayed from business. We have the Greenspan piece, which is up and doing super well. We have lots of personal stories on this, what's happening around the country. And we have a big offering we're going to keep up on Thanksgiving and what's safe and what's not safe, and the kind of fallacy that the tests will make you okay to go have Thanksgiving. Also doing super well is this piece on a gym trainer who brought in a bunch of athletes and actually did a study on ventilation in the gym and how that none of them got the virus. And then finally, we have a story on Lyft, which is, has a big ad campaign right now on, rent a car and go see the family, and that's exactly the wrong thing to do. And there's been a backlash over it. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Marcus. Nima.
Morning, Jeff. In our top spot today is COVID and all the threads that were mentioned by Matthew. The U.S. deaths surpassing 250,000, restricts going into effect in many states, New York City schools going remote, and the vaccine news. So we're using all our hotspot reporters, starting with Biana and Polo on New York City schools closing, Natasha Chen on Florida hitting that 900,000 case at the third state to do so, Sarah Sider from Michigan with her donut on the ER doctor, and Omar from Texas. A number of guest bookings. We've got Dr. Richard Besser, Dr. Greg Spencer out of New York. He's been doing a TikTok of what a day in the life of an emergency room doctor looks like. He talks about the sick patients he has to put on life support. He said they're running out of ventilators, hospitals are at capacity, and he says it's absurd for New York City to close schools, but still have so many other things open. He adds, should parents drop their kids off at bars, indoor restaurants, or gyms? So he's going to be on with Brianna. We've got Carol Rashad. She's an urgent care nurse in Arlington. She says they're running out of PPE, and we're using gloves and just putting hand sanitizer on them. We've got Mary Turner, the nurse who was with Biden yesterday. She's going to be on Kate's show. And then we've got the mayor of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, who voted against the mask mandate last week, but now says he'll vote for one. We're hitting the weekly jobless numbers and hitting Vanessa at 11 a.m. As was mentioned, she's going to be at this pre-Thanksgiving food distribution site where we're going to see hundreds of families, which kind of just signals what's happening across the country just ahead of Thanksgiving with millions unemployed, no stimulus inside, and COVID still running rampant. Our big event today is obviously at noon when Georgia will announce the results of its audit, so we're ready for that. Armor Walker is ready to handle that when that happens. We could see it happen a little earlier, so we're just on standby, and we've got our panels ready to go there. We've got George Christensen. He's the Milwaukee County Clerk, and he believes the recount there is unfounded and unnecessary, and he thinks that the Trump campaign is trying to suppress the vote in minority communities and Democratic strongholds. On the transition, all the threads that were mentioned, 11th day of no public event for Trump, his refusal to hand over the keys, and his continued pressure to block the transition, the strategy of delaying and casting doubt on the election, his influence on the Republican Party, and we'll use a poll that was mentioned that 70% of Trump supporters believe Biden won by fraud. So a number of guest bookings around there. And this afternoon, we do see Biden and Harris at this virtual meeting with the National Governors Association. They're expected to deliver remarks at 3:30, but probably will slide, but we'll be ready for that if it happens during our hours. That's where we start.
Thank you very much, Nima. Washington.
Good morning, and we'll also see when the Biden-Harris remarks will start, and we'll adjust accordingly. Arlette, Dana, Abby. Boris has our White House piece, the Tea Time President. Also, Erica Hill has our coronavirus wrap, and Dr. Seema Yasmin is with us. Dr. Nicole Gild from Baldwin's Medical Center in Des Moines on the front lines. John Dickerson joins, Jake, about the transition and more, and Dan Simon with the Tyson's plant story that Matthew mentioned.
And in the Situation Room, we'll be focused on the big picture of the final days. Coronavirus worse than ever, more than 250,000 deaths, and no signs letting up the week before Thanksgiving, where it can only get worse. We'll be following the latest numbers and restrictions around the country, as well as the hopeful vaccine news and the timelines for release. We'll also watch this 11:30 a.m. CDC newser, and we'll get to all of that with the wrap pieces and our doctors. All this as Trump remains behind closed doors for a 12th day, but we'll see if he comes out and talks today. His administration blocking the transition at every turn. We'll stay focused on the broader implications of all of this, the threat to society, sabotage, and the long-term implications for the country going forward, as well as the Biden transition. We'll obviously be watching the Biden-Harris news event, which sounds like it's going to fall into our hours. The meeting, the newser with the National Governors Association this afternoon. We'll see if they take questions there. Some bookings of note, we do have Ron Klain booked today. We also have Governor Larry Hogan booked, who I believe is part of this Governors Association meeting. And we have the Georgia Secretary of State.
Those are good bookings, Emily. Thank you.
Does anybody have any thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, it's Meredith. I was just thinking about Ben's comments earlier and, how this didn't have to happen in the U.S., how this 250,000 number could have been avoided. And, there's a good side conversation that's been going on in the Slacks off of Ben's comments. And I just wanted to share a thought or two on it. It's such a real personal struggle for people in terms of what to do or what not to do over Thanksgiving, and we see the interest from audiences in this, and it's timely, and it's a matter of health and life and death and all of it. And we talk about how America needs leadership right now, and that is of course true. But in addition to that, just people are craving family and friends and connections with their communities right now. It's a time of crisis. It's a holiday that's coming up, and so that little temptation of like, well, what if I just see a couple of people, and what if I go inside just for a little bit, and what if I take my mask off just for a little bit? And it's just these smallest moments of life that could make you sick, could kill you, and that make these numbers go in the absolute wrong direction when they're already as bad as they are. So I wanted to add, I think that's part of the work that we need to do around, testing, how that's not necessarily a good strategy, even though these lines are getting longer and longer and longer in terms of, if you see people over Thanksgiving or not. I think, everything that we've been doing on if you're going to see people, how to do it safely. It's all stuff we have, but the volume is just growing on it, and you see it in the images of these lines that are wrapping around these testing sites, and you see it in the conversations that people are citing on, like, Nextdoor, where everyone's trying to compare, like, where can they go to get a test so they can just make sure they're safe so they can see family and friends over the holiday. So anyway, just a general thought, and just, this is the intersection this coming week of where these horrible numbers are really, hitting home for people, and people are still in the process of making very personal decisions that are a matter of life and death.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Other thoughts?
Hi, Jeff. It's Elam on here. I've been thinking about, I think it was Dr. Redfield from CDC who said it a couple of months ago, that while we had seen these crazy numbers, that still like 90% of the population in the United States was susceptible to coronavirus. And I think it'd be useful to find out where that number stands now, so people understand, even though they're fatigued and we're hearing about all these people that have gotten it and have died, that there is still a lot of danger out there, and give them that real number to help them put that into perspective before Thanksgiving.
Yep. Perhaps the health.
Hey, Jeff, it's Matthew. I would say, based on the case numbers, I mean, about 3% of the population has had coronavirus, right? So that's like the other 97%-ish is the susceptible population.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else? Just two final notes from me then. We have major bookings today. Ron Klain at 5 o'clock, Bill Gates at 8 p.m., and Anthony Fauci at 9. Let's make sure we're pushing towards them. And at the end of the day, I think the important place for CNN here is that we need to be not on the side of Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or against Republican senators who are propping up Donald Trump's un-American behavior. We need to be on the side of America.